You're not screwed. You simply don't know how you're working.
Right.
So when you know, then you can go with your grain as opposed to against it.
Right. Hi, I'm Sonia Pedowick, your host of the Catalyst podcast. I'm a small business owner here. I founded Torian Consulting 9 years ago, an IT staffing firm here in Las Vegas. And during pandemic, I started the Catalyst Mastermind Collaborative, a small business mastermind that serves the small business community. I'll be coming to you twice a week, once just to talk about business ownership and what a mastermind group is, and once a week with a small business owner who will share their stories about lessons learned, how they started their businesses, share their knowledge with you, and all about the small business community and networking here in the Las Vegas market. So let's get into it. Welcome back to the Catalyst podcast. I'm your host, Sonia Pedowick. Today we have Gail Swift from Plans to Prosper Coaching. Today we're going to talk about the Kolbe, all things mastermind, and it's an absolute love fest. Hey, welcome to the show, Gail. Thanks for being my guest. I'm so excited that you're here today.
I am so excited. I'm here today. Thank you for asking me.
I wanted to have you on because, I fell in love with the Kolbe from the second, I fell in love with you from the second I met you, but then I fell in love with the Kolbe. So first, let's talk about what is the Kolbe.
Yeah, actually, I want to back up because I was still on when you fell in love because I want to talk about that because I was like equally in love. I honestly, when a big thing happens in your life, you kind of remember it.
Yeah.
And I remember meeting you through a friend with Sai.
Yeah.
And we had a conversation after that because you're like, here's my number.
Yeah.
And I'm like, giddy to have this conversation. I remember it was in the evening and you were just coming home from work.
Right.
And I learned that you are a recruiter and you own your own company and you own your own mastermind business. Yeah. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is perfect.
Yes.
Like, this is so perfect. This relationship can be just synergistic. Not only that, you're super cool, wickedly awesome, love you, totally love you. So I'm so thrilled to be sitting here. That's like the runway that I want to express about how this whole thing got to happen. Like, I'm feeling very blessed and thankful.
Well, thank you.
That this has continued like for a few years now.
I know. It's been a hot minute.
Yes.
I was trying to think of when it was because it was during pandemic.
It was like 2020, 2021?
21, I think. Okay. Yeah. And I think the interesting thing about why I think I fell in love with you was because I felt like I didn't know you. Right. I was asked to be there for you as part of this process in this personal development course. And I was supposed to be there to see you.
Right.
But I felt seen by you.
Oh, I didn't
And so
know
I
that.
thought that was really interesting in the context of what we were doing in that moment. And then in the context of what you do with Kolbe is you help people be seen. And I didn't know that at the moment.
Right.
But I just find that to be a very interesting tie through because anyone who meets with you in the context of Kolbe always takes me back to that moment when I first met you.
Wow.
And I don't know, it makes me like emotional to think about it because I felt like in the context of what we did, we had to look into each other's eyes.
I know.
And it was like a whole thing. And I was like, oh my gosh, this person sees people.
Yeah.
Like, I felt like, wow, she sees me and I'm supposed to be here to see her.
Oh.
And I thought that was really cool. But in the context of Kolbe, it helps you feel seen.
Right.
And so
thank you. I didn't know that was there. I didn't know that.
Look what podcasting does for people.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I never knew that.
You're welcome.
And that connection, you're right. That I've practiced doing that, by the way. That isn't something that just happened. I used to be a look past the eyes and see who's coming in the door kind of gal.
Really?
Very much so.
Interesting.
Like who's the other person?
Not present.
Yeah.
Oh, that doesn't strike me as you at all. But
I've worked on that. That hasn't been easy. It's taken years.
Wow.
And so that's super interesting that you brought up that connection between what I do with Kolbe and then just being a person who sees people.
Yeah.
Those two combined have been, I think, pretty powerful.
Yeah, they're your gift.
Yes. I would say it's my superpower.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
And Kolbe in and of itself could be whoever's using it, and a company's superpower is pretty amazing. It's been a tool that I have really cherished being able to have and use in my businesses.
Right.
And you don't only use it for businesses, you use it for families and students. And it came to me through my kids first, right? And during pandemic, it was definitely a savior for me. But I think that's a great segue into like, what is it?
Sure.
And how can people utilize it, I guess, in their lives and business?
You're right about it being a tool.
Yeah.
You're right about it being a tool. And it was designed by Kathy Kolbe, who was the inventor of the theory in 1987. I believe she came up with the theory in 1987, but she had been working on it ever since I think she was like 11.
Really?
Absolutely.
Wow.
Her dad developed the Wonderlic IQ test.
That's right.
And she remembers she has a podcast. She's, I think, recorded 100 of them. It's called Perfectly Obstinate People.
Mm-hmm.
And in one of those podcasts, she talks about how she would work with her dad's governmental paperwork on the dining room table. When she was taking the bus to school, she was in maybe 6th or 7th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, Dad, I'm seeing something else. And she says this on the podcast. I'm seeing something else in people because he was measuring mental ability, more of a cognitive assessment. And she said, I'm noticing that the really smart people, they do things differently than maybe, I don't know, someone that doesn't get good grades, but I'm noticing they both get things done.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They both get things done. The timing might be different and the way is different. And so she started then recognizing and studying humans. And her dad goaded her and said, well, what are you seeing?
Right.
What are you picking up on, Kathy?
Yeah.
And she's dyslexic. So she had a hard time in school. And so ever since then, her dad encouraged her to find what she was looking for. And when she was in school, she was learning about Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates and learned about the 3 parts of the mind.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So she's like, okay, so my dad is testing this cognitive part.
Right.
And I know that everyone has emotions and personality.
Right.
But what's this other part, like this doing part?
Right.
And then she definitely recognized that what she was studying was how people
Do things. Yeah.
and take action.
Right.
And in the 80s and early 90s, working with Motorola and AT&T, I think some IBM, all very male-dominant companies, it was hard for her. She was a single mom with a business trying to make a go of it. No one believed her.
Right.
So she would test people and make predictions about companies, stick it in a drawer.
Right.
And months later, these CEOs would open up what she wrote, and it was exactly what happened to their company. Like, this is going to happen. Your company's going to implode because the right people aren't in the right seat, which is huge.
Yeah.
And the further away people get from how they naturally work, the worse it's going to be.
Yeah.
For the bottom line and for that individual and for you.
Right.
I mean, as the business owner. So that's what Kolbe is. That's why she developed the theory to measure how people work.
And so how do you help people now? Like, if you were to bring it down to just like the level of like our listeners, like how does that translate? I mean, right people, right seed is something that's talked about in traction or E-Myth, all those things. How do you, I don't want to say dumb that down, but bring it down to
I'm
like
going to totally piggyback on what you just said originally.
Yeah.
I would say it is, I would say it's the microscope or the antidote to see people better.
Yeah.
Or to see people more.
Right.
Because I already, like you said, I naturally am with them and I'm present.
Right.
But when I can know how they work and express that to them in a way that they understand.
Right.
The number one word is validating and like, oh my gosh, there's nothing wrong with me, which is the way I felt.
Right.
When I heard this the first time.
Yeah.
I had a neurological disorder. I was kicked out of school a few times. I'm like, I'm so screwed.
Right.
And I hear this.
There's
and
nowhere
I'm like,
for me to go.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm not screwed.
Right.
So I help people understand. I would eliminate the comparison game.
Right. So often we're
and like,
stuck
you're
in
not
that.
screwed.
Right.
You're not screwed. You simply don't know how you're working.
Right.
So when you know, then you can go with your grain as opposed to against it.
Right.
And then I so enjoy like seeing people, as you're aware, like just being with them.
Right.
One-on-one or in small groups. I work really well in small groups.
Yeah. So for businesses, well, we could take it back to when I first started working with you. It was the beginning of pandemic. I was thrust into this role of being a teacher at home, running a business, trying to figure out like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? I have a rising freshman coming from private school into public school. I have an 8th grader and I had a 5th grader and I was like, I have no idea how to figure this out. So I had to do the Kolbe on my kids.
Right.
Because I know how I work. At least I had some understanding of how I organize myself and I knew what would work for me and what wouldn't. And working from home I knew already that wasn't going to work for me. And I already knew being a teacher wasn't going to work for me. And I could also already quickly see that working in this remote teaching wasn't working for 90% of the teachers that were teaching the kids, that there was a disconnect there. So learning that one of my kids was very much like me, one was completely opposite of me, and one is just rogue.
Yeah.
Totally different. And learning how to set them up for success and kind of helping them sort of lead their own way in organizing their day, organizing their studies was just a game changer for me. You know, I could let my middle child organize her own way, give her the tools, get her a day planner so that she could, you know, like, this is how I need to organize my day. This is how I need to write things down. I knew the older, I'd be like, get an organizer, write your things down. That wasn't how he was going to do it.
No,
it just wasn't. And
but you didn't know that.
I didn't know that before.
Right.
I just didn't know it before.
That's frustrating when you keep banging your head against a wall. And
Why
you're like,
aren't you doing it this way?
Yes.
That was very eye-opening, but then translating it into business and understanding how to like fill seats, like very specifically understanding, you know, if I could identify what I wanted out of a seat, right? And then how to hire for that seat eliminated a lot of stress. So talk about how companies can do that.
Right. So there are 3 parts of the mind, as we talked about. So this is one part.
Right.
This is what I love about it is it's non-emotional.
Right.
It's a non-emotional part. So
which some of those assessments out there are emotionally driven.
Right.
Right. There's a lot of assessments that people are mainstream, and it doesn't mean that they aren't good.
They measure another part of the mind.
Exactly. And some companies value that as a piece of their hiring process or their culture, which is great. The Kolbe is just not that.
It's not that. So it just measures a different part of the mind.
Right.
All 3, I think, need to be taken into consideration when hiring.
Yeah.
Right. So all 3. So I appreciate using this tool as the first line of defense because it is non-emotional and it is purely based on how someone takes action. So to get down to it specifically, there are 3 kinds of assessments that, Kolbe offers 3, the A, B, and the C. So the A index is what I call the mothership.
Right.
This is how you are naturally wired.
Right.
And how I am naturally wired, how people are naturally wired to do things.
Right.
And so, like I said earlier, the further they are in their position away from that A index, the worse it's going to be. And then you're going to have to deal with onboarding costs and losing that employee because they're not in alignment. Their role is not in alignment with the A.
Right. And we all know from a cost perspective, they say it can take up to 150% the cost of the position to hire and replace seats. Right.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's very cost prohibitive if you have to like pay 150% the times the seat. If it's a $45,000 seat and you have to pay 150% to refill that every time you refill it.
Isn't it great? We're taking time on the front end to figure out the right person.
Yes, exactly. Right.
It's like common sense to me. It's common sense. So what we've done, and we're doing actually now, is you as the business owner are filling out what's called a Kolbe C position, and you identify the 4-digit number that position requires without having anybody there yet.
Right.
So all you're doing is identifying the needs that person what must have for your perspective based on the job description for that role.
Right.
So, and there's a 4-digit number that comes from that.
Yep.
So when you have that 4-digit number, then it's kind of like playing Old Maid.
Right.
I don't think I've ever said that before. Right. But you match up like the people that come into your sphere that you put it out there, you put it on wherever you put it on to attract candidates. And then based on their index, their A index, you match it with what's required of the C index.
Yeah.
And that comes up with a grade level for the position.
Right.
So I'll say, generally speaking, and Kolbe will say anything that's a B- or higher is worth considering
for the role.
For the role. And that's where you come in and identify skills, which is cognitive. And I believe that's the least of concern can be taught.
Right.
Skills can be taught.
100%.
And then the second most important after the Kolbe, I believe, is the affective of the person. So that person's ethics, the morals,
culture,
the values,
personality.
Yeah, absolutely. If they're an introvert or extrovert, how is that going to affect the role? What's their past like? Things like that.
So when it comes to Kolbe, some examples to be like deeper dive into it. So if I take the assessment and I think the person needs to be very reactive, needs to think on their feet, needs to be able to change gears more quickly, the Kolbe number is going to reflect a certain way.
Absolutely.
And so then if the person who takes the Kolbe, their number shows that they're not able to adjust very quickly, that they need more time, they need to gather more facts, that they are slower to react to changing environment. And say like my number for changing environment is at like a 9 and they come up as a 3, the chances are they're going to experience a lot of stress in that environment. And I'm going to have to manage them quite differently. They're going to experience stress on a day-to-day basis in that role. Chances are that's going to be a harder role for them to thrive in. They're going to be going, like you said, against the grain quite a bit. So why would I put them in that position? The higher likelihood of them experiencing stress and turnover in that or wanting to quit that job is going to be higher. So this helps me make that decision based on that number more quickly. On the flip side, if I require the seat they are going to need to do a lot of research, a lot of data gathering, a lot of report building, and on their fact finder or even follow through number, it's very low. They don't enjoy doing the detail work. They don't enjoy doing the research. That's not something that comes easy to them. It's very low. I need a 9. They're a 3 again. There's a big gap there. They're going to experience a lot of stress in that. And I'm going to want that information from them. And they're again and again not going to see that through for me as a manager. That person and I are going to experience a lot of stress. Now, if they're like an 8, if I need an 8 and there may be a 6, there could be some managerial things and conversations that we can have to maybe meet there and come to some accommodations that help us get there. It's that 2 delta is not that big of a gap. They may get there still. They may get there in their own way.
Absolutely.
And I can be okay with that because they're still getting there. I get to be okay with that or not. But I get to realize they are going to get there in a 6 way, not in my 8 way, but they'll still get there. And what I love about the Kolbe is that report, that A to C report comparison gives you a lot of information on that and how to communicate in that way.
All right. So I'm going to back up because people are like, what?
Yes.
All right. So what Sonia's talking about that this measures is it's in 4 modes. It's in Fact Finder, which deals with details. And the number that she's giving it is a 1 through 10. Now that number is purely based on time spent in that area. And these are needs. They're not wants. So on a scale of 1 to 10, a 1 needs very little detail and a 10 needs a lot of detail in that particular order of Fact Finder. And then the second mode is follow through, and that's a blue mode. The Fact Finder is a red mode. So the follow through is a blue mode, and that is how someone organizes and systematizes. So at the one end, do you want to finish this? Do you know?
No, keep going.
The one end, they don't need a lot of structure or planning. They can switch gears. Like throw stuff in a suitcase at the last minute. And the bottom end, the 7 through 10 of that blue, they do need a plan. They do need a plan. So these are accountants particularly, or I don't know, maybe people,
report writers,
grant writers,
even administrative, individuals,
people that need a plan. That's just the way it goes.
Event planners.
Absolutely. So then the third mode of behavior that Kolbe mentions or measures is called Quick Start. And that is someone's need for risk and uncertainty.
That's like me.
Fearless leader right here. Risk and uncertainty. And that at the one end of the spectrum, people don't need a ton of surprise. And then the other end, they do need a fair amount of surprise, and they work very well last minute. And that's a green mode. Which is go mode. Right. So that's your mode and that's my mode, ironically, and Ruby's mode. So then the last line is called implementer. And this is a need for hands-on, getting your hands on the world. So up at the top, the 1, 2, 3 and implementer, these people are very literal about physical things. And then the bottom, they need to get their hands on the world. So my son is like this, and you have a couple kids hovering in that. And they need to get their hands on it. And so those are the modes and those are the numbers that go with the modes that you were talking about.
I always give the example of my husband and I, because we're opposite, right?
Same,
And I always give the example of how we plan trips. So if I want to go somewhere, and I give the example of I wanted to go on this trip back east to Washington, D.C., And if I want to do this, the need that I have to do is I could just be like, let's go and I'll buy the tickets and I'll do everything. But if I want to plan it with my husband, the best way to get him on board to plan a trip like this is to actually, I can't just like walk into the kitchen and be like, I want to go here. I want to do this and let's go do this. Cause he'd be like, oh my God, what are you talking about? This is so crazy. And poke holes in the trip, like almost like an AR-15. Well, what about this? And what about this? And how much is it going to cost? And then I get like deflated and upset and like, okay, fine, let's not go. So what I learned through this process of understanding his Kolbe and my Kolbe and the need for information and the need to process it and organize it in a certain way was if I really wanted to plan a trip in a certain way, that I needed to send him an email.
I know I'm the same way.
And it's fine. And it gets him to want to do the trip in the way that I want to do it. Or maybe we organize it differently. In this particular case, I really wanted to do this trip in this way. So I sent him an email with the hotel information, the travel, where I wanted to go, how I wanted to do it with the boys, and then just kind of let him digest it, look at it because he's a very high fact finder and he needs time to like process things, and then waited a few days and then got an email back that just said, just book it. Because normally he's the planner of the trips. He likes to research the dates, the time, the travel, how we're getting there, where we're going, what we're doing.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to do this trip to Washington, D.C. with the boys and the whole family. It turned out him and my daughter ended up going on a soccer tournament trip. So I ended up getting to do it with just the boys. But if I had gone in and been like, I want to go to Washington, D.C. and I want to do this, and he would have been like, where, why, blah, 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 blah. And then I would have been like, forget it. I'm not planning the trip. But because I sent him an email and sent it in this way and then just let it sit for a few days, he sent me an email back and said, go ahead and book the trip. Great. This sounds great. I was like, oh my gosh. But had I not had the tools and understanding of how he needed to process information, what was valuable for him and the time he needed for big spending, big trip things, it wouldn't have worked that way. And it wouldn't have honored his way of communicating. And it's just a better way. And I'm also learning like what time of day is better to communicate, all of those things. It's just, and even with my employees who needs more information.
I was just going to ask you, you do that with your employees too?
100%. 100%.
Wow.
Who needs more information, how they needed more information.
Right.
We were just planning, our podcast for that company. And there's a big worksheet. Like when I sat with Ruby and planning this podcast, like she and I could just bounce ideas off. In planning that one, I gave them the workbook a week in advance.
Okay.
Because they need the information way differently than I do. They needed to digest it. If I just would have fired off things in the moment, like what's our audience? They would have been like, oh my gosh, information overload. They need information way differently than I do.
Wow.
And so just knowing that about them, if I really want them to think about making a decision on that particular team and that company, I need to give them a few days.
Okay.
And information ahead of time.
That's
and
smart.
Typically written down.
Right.
Like tangible.
That's smart. Do you notice that when they know this about themselves, because I believe that person is ultimately responsible for their way of working.
100%.
So, but I see you giving them, like, you're respecting how they work.
Oh, 100%. And they're more active participants in it because of that.
You notice that.
I think that they feel more valued as employees because of that as well.
So what you're not doing is you're not putting your way of doing it onto them.
No, because my way would be just show up for the meeting and be an active participant. It's just different. But I know I'm different.
Right.
So.
Way to go.
Yeah, it's super fun.
Yeah, way to go.
And so as a business owner, it's great to have the tool.
Yes.
It saved me time and money. It's a great coaching tool because everyone I coach responds differently. Learns differently, gets information differently.
Right.
And so being able to like coach people differently is a big win.
One of the things about Catalyst that's awesome is the difference in how people work.
Oh, yeah.
Most people there are quick starts.
Yes.
They have that need for risk. But the people that aren't, like, that is valuable information because they have a different perspective on things.
Yeah.
So in the group, everyone has something to offer that's different from your way of looking.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, I know I've told you that story. I'm going to tell you that story again. I'm going to say the story again, that the group is so freeing. And honestly, it takes me a while to be comfortable with people, and so many amazing business owners in the group. It was so many amazing ideas. And as someone starting out, honestly, it was a little scary, kind of a little scary. Like, who am I? I'm not at that level. This is really scary. So one day I got a lot of information from all of those business owners. And I came out to my car and I remember putting my hands on my steering wheel like 10 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember asking myself, gosh, you know what? In months past, I would just skedaddle
Yeah.
and do everything that they suggested. And this is the first time that I said, does that resonate with my filter?
Yeah.
And it didn't. And I had the courage, I was proud of myself because I had the courage to say, I'm going to do this my way.
Right.
And still have a safe place to land.
Yeah. Yeah.
If it didn't work out, which was monumental for me.
Yeah.
So I was pleased and proud because I did it my way. And then all along with getting all of those great bits of information and feedback from people that have been in business for years, and they're like, all right, let's keep going. It wasn't berating or you suck kind of thing.
No. Yeah.
It was great. It was so freeing and so great.
So what would you say to business owners out there that don't know about a mastermind? Like, what's valuable other than that? Like, why, what are you waiting for? Why should they consider joining a mastermind?
Right.
What's out there for 2025 for them?
So honestly, you giving the people the freedom, you give business owners freedom to figure it out their way. You don't try and pigeonhole them. You know there isn't one way to do everything. And I so appreciate your freedom and flexibility. And then all the people in the group have different opinions, and you allow people to try and fail and try and fail. But what you keep doing is helping people get back up and keep going. And sometimes people are bent over, they can't quite get up yet, right? Because they're still so torn from what just happened. And you're like, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. And I'm picturing you and they're kind of bent over and still humbling along, but you're like, I gotcha.
Yeah.
And I picture you rubbing their back and you're like, it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I love that.
Yeah. It's a journey. I mean, business ownership it's great.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't want the narrative to be out there like, oh my gosh, business ownership's such a struggle. Right. But it's a journey.
It is a journey.
And it can be super fun. And I think that's one of the things that I think some people in the group have also talked about is there isn't always a place to celebrate business ownership, right? You don't have this I want to be excited about what I'm doing as a business ownership circle, right? Especially if you grew up in this town. We've had some members who are like, I grew up in this town and I've ascended, and my people that I grew up with or went to high school with or whatever, they haven't. And so to be able to show my success sometimes feels like in the face of the people I grew up with, they're not really cheering me on. They're still stuck in what they're doing. And so I want a place where I can celebrate some of the successes that I'm having, but then also be able to continue to scale and continue to grow and be an awesome business owner and be like, hey, I just broke $1 million, or I just had my first $500,000 a year, or whatever it is.
Right.
And then be proud of that and not feel like, oh, I need to kind of keep that to myself because the people I grew up with here or my family or whoever it isn't having that same success.
Right.
And that's kind of neat about our room is that we can talk about those things, and that some of the things also transcend business, right? There's some personal stuff that how you do one thing in one area of your life, it's also affecting the other areas of your life.
Yeah.
So what has been some of the things that you feel the mastermind has also helped you with?
The letter and the wins,
Yeah.
the celebrations and the wins and your exercises, business or personal, like you just said, how you do one thing is how you do all things. Whatever you're doing in there, whatever exercise you're doing will transcend into business because it's transcending into you.
Yeah.
It's the same. So when you had us write a letter, at the beginning of the year, you had us write a letter or a reflection, how we want this year to go.
Yeah.
And then you give it to us at the end of the year. I was bawling.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was bawling.
Yeah.
I was absolutely bawling. I could barely get through that letter. I mean, I was ugly crying, sniveling, ugly crying. It felt like 5 minutes of just, I'm like, oh my gosh, my mascara, all my makeup is just running.
Yeah.
It was unbelievably powerful.
Yeah.
And those nuggets you do more often than not. And the celebrations that you give are personal.
Yeah.
So for birthdays, you make a concerted effort to get the cake, to get the individual thing that person likes, Like you're very personal with that.
Thanks.
So those little celebrations that you show people, I think give people the freedom to have the little celebrations.
Yeah, because I think as business owners, we're so busy being busy. And
Yeah.
being busy is like celebrated in this weird way. I just watched this documentary. I can't think of his name right now. Brian of this company Blueprint, the guy who started Venmo, and then he made all these millions, and he reflected for a portion of it about how, at that time in the Silicon Valley, it was like celebrated for being like so busy.
I know.
But at the time, like his family, he had 3 kids, his marriage was deteriorating. He was like unhealthy, overweight, and suicidal.
Yeah.
And he's like, I just look back at and he made millions and millions
Sure.
and millions and millions of dollars, so much so that like now he's investing millions and trying to figure out how to reverse ageism. And so, whether or not this documentary, the documentary is sort of interesting because it's like you could sort of think, okay, now the guy's gone the opposite way and he's like so crazy about trying to like prolong his life, right?
Interesting.
But the underlying message was there really isn't any place as a business owner to just like celebrate and not celebrate like I work so hard. Like when you die, the dash in between isn't about how hard you worked, right?
So
Is that what
true.
you want it to be about, right?
Right.
And so I do try to make the room about the little things in between and the little lessons. And are we taking pause to make sure that we're talking about our wholeness, right?
Yeah.
How it's affecting our family.
How did you get to know that was so important? Because I have a hard time celebrating. Like, how did you get to know that was a big deal?
I mean, I think people celebrated that for me, and I
Okay.
think the very first mastermind that I was in that really helped me buy my business was some of the biggest, most wealthiest, progressive, successful people in this town, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't own a business at that time. I pleaded with them, please let me be in this room to help me buy my business. And they didn't need to let me be in their room. They were like, how much time do you need? I said, like 9 months. Help me buy this business from this person or start my own business. And they were
Right.
like, how much time do you need? I said 9 months. And they gave me a seat at the table. And that was a huge gift, right? And they were, some of the most powerful, they happened to be, men, and they owned very prominent companies. And at the time, one was buying it from his dad, one was divesting from a partner. They were going through very interesting things, and they allowed me into their lives, right? It's confidential. I wouldn't ever share what, personally exactly what was going on. But I remember being in that room and they shared a lot of personal things too, and celebrated, but also like tumultuous things were happening in their lives as they were trying to navigate multi-million-dollar businesses. Right. And I just remember like thinking they didn't need to let me in that room, but they did. And they just still found time to take time to go to the ranch and, have a family celebration or be at their daughter, because they were years older than me. They were farther in their careers, that they still made time to be, dads were dying, wives were getting cancer. Like life was happening, and so I just remember thinking like, I need to be very present if I'm going to do this. Right. Like Desmond wasn't barely born yet. Right. Like he's my youngest. And so that was like, just pause for a moment, Sonia. And like, if you're really going to do this at 40, and there was a lot of regret at that table too, of things missed and relationships breaking down and things. So I just remember being very fortunate to kind of listen to that and be a part of that and be like, you have an opportunity here to maybe learn from this. And that's the gift of Mastermind, is like everyone's bringing their very personal experience to the table in business and personal life. So pay attention to that and be a part of that and bring your whole self to one day a month. Right. Be very present to what's going on in businesses. The suicide rate of CEOs across the country, pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, is off the chain, right? CFOs, CEOs are killing themselves. And it happens to be a lot of white males who are responsible for the financial fiduciary part of their businesses that take their own lives because of what happens, right? So there's an opportunity to like be present for those type of things. So
I love the celebrations.
Yeah. So yeah, as we close, what would be your parting message to everyone out there?
Catalyst Mastermind is amazing. And I think every business owner listening right now needs to give it a chance to work.
Thank you.
Needs to give it an opportunity to sink in. And if anything else, because the celebrations lead to the next celebration. And as a business owner, I bypass that and just think, oh, you know what? We just got to get to the next thing or get to the next milestone. But because of your focus on those things, the people things, the work things, like it was easier to get to the next celebration and victory and just rest, give yourself a moment to just see where you've come from.
Yeah.
And that was super, super valuable. That is super valuable.
Well, thank you very much. So if they want to hear from you and learn about the Kolbe, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, actually, planstoprospercoaching.com is my website. Or you can give me a call and you can put my phone number in the show notes.
We will definitely do that. And people should know they can use it for their businesses, but also it's incredibly helpful for your families as well.
It is. Thank you.
The gift. You are a gift.
Thank you, friend.
Thank you for being on my show.
My pleasure.
If you like what you saw today on the Catalyst podcast, make sure you subscribe to our show, like it, and share it with someone who you think might also find value.